Hey, welcome to another episode of Coffee and HEMA with me, Jamie McKeever. Today's episode, I'm going to carry on the theme of the last episode where I was talking about right of way versus afterblow. And I want to have a bit more of a focus on afterblow today, specifically the topic of afterblow tempo or the window of time you have to attack and how that's defined after a first strike has been made in an afterblow system. Reminder for those that don't know, Afterblow in general is a common tournament rule, particularly in the UK and the Nordic regions, where essentially after, if both fences have been struck, there is some window of time after the first fencer has landed their strike for the other fencer to strike them back. I'm not going to talk today about what then happens, right? I'm not going to talk today about whether that, how that affects scoring exactly. Some score difference will happen as a result of this, right? The first person will get either less points, or depending on locations, they might actually end up losing this, right? But something has happened. But what I really want to focus on is the definition of that time, some things that people do. I'm going to talk about each of them and sort of why I do and don't like them. As well as how they kind of punish or reward particular fencing decisions, tactical decisions fencers might make, depending on sort of how long or how short that window is. People define it differently. It's not one consistent way of doing it. In general, people refer to tempo. So if something is too long, people will often refer to out of tempo. I don't necessarily like the use of the word tempo here, even though it's a offensive term. And at some point there was a cutoff, right? Obviously, clearly too late is after the fence is dekitted and the tournament's over. If you got behind them and hit them, your attack is clearly out of tempo. Somewhere before that, we will be deciding that it is the appropriate length of time or the appropriate length of time to hit back. Now, tempo normally is used. I've got a whole other set of videos on tempo coming up, but tempo is normally used to say an action, right? An action of some kind. And a lot of people aren't very good at defining what that is, and it is quite confusing sometimes in terms of the definition of what tempo actually means in that context. I'll give you an example. If I've got one action, do one strike, but I make two small steps with it, is that one tempo or two? If I'm extended, arms extended because I've just kind of struck, and then if I do a cut around where I kind of move like that, was that a prep, one action, attack, two actions, or if it's one smooth motion, is it one action rather than two? Now, most of these edge cases, when people use tempo to describe that, people then also go on to say explicitly, yes, this is or no, this isn't, and you should, right? If you're going to write. You've got one tempo to do it. You should really articulate what the hell you mean by tempo, because despite it being a fencing term, not even the original fencing text use it consistently between each other. So it's a deeply confusing term to use without explanation. But broadly speaking, I don't mean one attack, right? I've never seen a system that lets you have. No, that's not true. I've never fenced in this, but the cork system lets you have multiple attacks, and I'm not quite sure how it works. I've never actually tested it. I've only heard about it. But by and large, one attack is the most that people will let you have. Some systems then have issues defining like where exactly that attack starts. Right? At what point does the clock kick in to count whether that tempo happens to be? And in some cases, like the Helsinki longsword system, you essentially need to be starting your response action even before a strike has landed on you for it to count as sufficiently close in time to also be accepted as a scoring point. To my mind, that's a double, but whatever. I don't want to quibble about it. So essentially, if you start attacking before the strike lands you, but while it's in motion, yes, it counts. If the strike has hit you and then you start your action, no, it's too late under that system. Wessex is a bit broader. In theory, after you've been struck, you have one action after that, so it can start after that, but you've only got one action still. I'll come back to the window for that in a second, but there are other ways of defining this, right? And the other two that you see much less commonly, but I think are much clearer. the sort of the second most common is defining it in terms of the numbers of steps defense takes before they make their strike. Fight camp has one step. I've seen a couple that have two steps, right? And I think actually the first time we see a written description of Afterblow as a historical source, I think it's Manciolino, and I think he's got one step. He uses a step to define his Afterblow window as well. And the step is much clearer, I think, than a tempo, right? You get all these weird kind of edge cases, like, this kind of turn and cut, Muline or Stramazone or whatever word you want to call it, from whatever language you want to steal it from. That's one of those particularly edge cases where it's like, is that one tempo or two? Using the step to do this kind of gets rid of all of that. At the same time, you can do a couple small steps and a pretty quick action, and suddenly it becomes out of tempo, particularly if you're kind of moving forward with a thrust sort of thing. But that's a consequence. Accept it, right? It's fine. I do think, someone trying to judge it, trying to judge, did a step happen, is much easier to define, and solves an issue that I think a too short a window, a lockout window causes. Again, I'm going to come back to that. And then the other definition that I played about with, I've only ever seen it in things that I've run, is to stop defining it on the basis of what the initial striker, what the afterblowing person did, and start defining it on the basis of what the initial striker did. If you have watched my last video, or you're aware of afterblow rules in general, the whole point of afterblow is to encourage the person who struck their opponent to remember that they need to now get out or keep themselves safe somehow after the fact, by parrying, by getting out, by closing the grapple, whatever that happens to be. So in an internal sword event called Summer Sword Shenanigans, I've run a couple of times, I switched the definition to say, okay, if you struck someone, you now have to do something, right? You have to either retreat, you have to parry an incoming blow, you have to close the grapple. And I think I added in later on that if your striker is kind of locking out the blow as in a counter thrust kind of thing, that also sort of negates the afterblow. But you have to do something to negate the afterblow in that definition. You can't just stand around there and hope for the best. And the reason I switched to that is related to the reasons of issues with the lockout window, where different styles of fencing will be punished by different sort of lengths of time that you've got to define this kind of lockout window, particularly if you're using tempo. And the reason I say that is that I like to parry. A strike's coming at me, I like to parry it. And of course I'm not always successful, right? And definitions of tempo, particularly ones that use the sword action to define it, that are relatively short, can punish this, in the sense that if you fail your parry, it is highly unlikely that you will immediately stop, right, or finish your parry before the strike lands, right? You're still kind of parrying and you kind of go past it. Normally it's kind of got around the guard. So under that, if you fail that parry, it's essentially impossible for you to get an afterblow if there's a very, very narrow window to do it. So I think very short, narrow afterblow windows punish people trying to parry, which is kind of counterintuitive to what you want to do with an afterblow. Remember, the point is to remind you to defend. So I find that is quite an unpalatable consequence of those. Now, I've had some people say the opposite. I've had some people say that actually long afterblow windows encourage a fencer to just attack constantly and hope for the best. And I think that's also true as well. And I want to point out that these two things are not inconsistent, because the first one is about what is your behavior when someone's attacking you, and the second one is about your behavior when you are the attacker and you just kind of keep attacking, right? So they're two different consequences of this short versus long afterblow rule, and they're both bad, right? I think punishing you for trying to defend and failing more harshly than somebody who decides, fuck it, I'm just going to go for it, is a bad consequence, because you're now punishing something which is a good action. It'd be better if they succeeded, right? But the instinct of trying to parry is better than the instinct of not trying to parry. But at the same time, you don't want to encourage someone to just constantly attack, hoping that the afterblow window keeps them safe or at least best neutral. The other problem with very short windows, and this is why I think the other two definitions that don't require just the sword action are better in some ways, is that what you often see is someone just kind of lands their strike and then they don't do anything, right? They don't make any active method attempts to retreat or parry or whatever happens to be. Maybe they parry statically, but they're not actually trying to withdraw from the engagement or control the engagement in any way, shape, or form. And whether they gain points or not then is dependent on the coin toss of what the opponent has happened to choose to do, and the way that they've done it, and the judge's ability to measure that, which is also a separate problem. So you have it that they come in, they just stand there like an idiot, and they get hit back, and they get full points again, not because they've done anything right, but because the other person has done something wrong, right? And if we go back to the original purpose of the Afterblow rule, again, it's to remind you to defend. That is the whole point of it. So if the rule is what's keeping you safe, not your active attempt to defend it, then I think the rule has failed. Okay, because you need to be doing something for the rule to be successful. Right? That's the whole point of it, is to encourage you to do something. And I know I've said many times, people don't actually change their fencing, which is true. But at least it should be rewarding somebody doing that behavior, right? And it's thus encouraging them that way, rather than just a coin toss or whatever happens to be. Those issues don't happen so much for the step or the defining about. Well, it doesn't happen so much for the step, but it doesn't happen at all for the second one, because there you are told explicitly this is what you must do, and if you don't do it, you don't do it. But both of those, unfortunately, had the alternative consequence of being more likely to promote kind of revenge-like attacks, not necessarily malicious, but at least even from a points perspective, that you've been hit and you're going to come back and try to come straight in. Because you've got such a longer window for landing that strike, and the other person is so much harder for them to kind of deal with that. As a result, it's if you want to just kind of tank a hit and then go for the afterblow to negate it, then you've got a bigger window to do that. So these are the consequences you've got to deal with when devising rule sets. Which of these is the one that you consider the worst error, and thus that's the one that you should punish more than the other. That's all I'll say about Afterblow today. As I said, there's two issues of forgetting to defend in different circumstances are ones that we want to deal with. Next video, I'm going to keep talking about Afterblow, but I'm going to compare it to some other decisions in terms of weighted scoring and what we do with the Afterblow and how that relates to the first score, because those can also help mitigate some of the issues that we're talking about here, and create other problems as well if you do those. So thanks for watching.